My son got married on a Saturday in April, and I ironed my good blouse the night before. That's the detail nobody wants to hear. Not the venue, not the flowers, not the three-tiered cake my daughter-in-law's mother had flown in from some bakery in Manhattan. Just me, standing at my ironing board at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, pressing the same pale blue blouse I'd worn to every important occasion for the past 6 years, making sure the collar sat right. I wanted to look nice for my son. I should have known then. When you're ironing a 6-year-old blouse the night before your child's wedding while his new in-laws are probably asleep in the suite they booked at the Harrington, something has already gone wrong. You just haven't named it yet. His name is Daniel. He's 34, works in commercial real estate, has his father's jaw and his grandmother's stubbornness, and for the past 3 years he's been engaged to a woman named Celeste Whitmore. The Whitmore family is old Connecticut money, the kind that doesn't talk about money because they don't have to. The wedding was held at Whitmore Ridge, a sprawling property outside Hartford that had been in Celeste's family for 4 generations. Rolling lawns, a stone terrace, a greenhouse converted into a reception hall, 220 guests, an open bar that served things I'd never heard of. I came alone. I always come to things alone these days. I found Daniel 20 minutes before the ceremony started. He was standing near the terrace with his groomsmen, already a little flushed from the champagne they passed around at the rehearsal dinner I hadn't been invited to. When he saw me, he smiled, but it was the smile he'd been giving me for 2 years, the one that meant, "Please don't make this complicated." "Mom." He kissed my cheek. "You look great." I handed him the envelope. I'd been carrying it in my purse since 8 that morning, shifting it every time I moved so it wouldn't crease. Inside was a card I'd written by hand, and behind the card, a single sheet of paper folded into thirds, a document I'd been holding for the right moment. "This is your wedding gift," I said. "Don't open it here. Wait until things settle down." He glanced at it. "Okay, sure." He started to slide it into his jacket pocket. Celeste appeared at his elbow. I had tried to like Celeste. I want to be honest about that. I had tried for 3 years to find the thing in her that Daniel loved, the part that was worth loving. Sometimes I almost got there. She was intelligent. She had good posture. She could command a room in a way I never could. But she looked at me like I was something she hadn't planned for. "What's that?" She nodded at the envelope. "A gift," Daniel said. She plucked it from his hands before he could pocket it. He let her. That was the thing about Daniel and Celeste. He always let her. She opened it right there on the terrace with 2 of her bridesmaids watching, pulled out the card, glanced at it, set it aside, unfolded the document, read it. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in it sharpened. "Is this a joke?" I didn't say anything. "Daniel." She held the paper toward him. "Look at this." He looked. His face did something complicated. "Mom, this is a property deed." "Yes." "For the building on Clement Street." "Yes." She laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which almost made it worse. It was the kind of laugh that meant she genuinely found something absurd. "You're giving him a deed to some building in Hartford as a wedding gift." "It's a commercial property," I said. "Fully leased. Generates about $9,000 a month in rental income." She laughed again, louder this time. One of the bridesmaids covered her mouth with her hand. $9,000 a month. She looked at Daniel with a kind of fond exasperation. "Your mother owns a rental building." "It's one of several," I said. Neither of them seemed to hear that part. "Daniel," she said, "we should probably find a photographer." She linked her arm through his and turned toward the greenhouse. Over her shoulder, almost as an afterthought, she called back to me, "Thank you, Barbara. It's very sweet." "Barbara. My name is Wren." It had been Wren for 63 years. She'd just never bothered to learn it. Daniel glanced back once. I could see something in his face that might have been apology or might have been relief that she'd handled it so he didn't have to. Then they were gone, moving through the crowd, and I was standing alone on the terrace holding the card she'd set aside. I picked it up. folded it, put it back in my purse. I stayed for the ceremony. I stayed for dinner. I watched my son dance with his wife and her father and her college roommates and 3 cousins I'd never met. At 9 o'clock, I retrieved my cardigan from the coat check, said goodbye to no one in particular, and drove home. On the seat beside me, I placed the property deed. She'd left it on the terrace railing when they walked away. Didn't even take it with them. $9,000 a month. It's very sweet. I drove with the windows down even though it was cold. That night I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, not crying. I'd moved past crying somewhere around Daniel's 30th birthday when I finally understood that the distance between us wasn't a phase he was going through. It was a choice he was making, renewed quietly every time he let someone speak to me the way Celeste spoke to me and said nothing. The house was quiet. It's always quiet now. 3 bedrooms, a yard that still has the basketball hoop Daniel used in high school, a kitchen table where I used to help him with geometry homework on Tuesday nights. I bought this house in 1998 with money I'd saved and a small loan I paid off in 7 years. I've been here ever since. I went to the drawer where I keep files, the organized kind. Hanging folders, label tabs, the system I built, because when you manage 16 properties across 4 counties, paperwork will bury you if you let it. 16 properties. I pulled out the folder I'd put together over the past month. Not all of it, just the summary sheet. The current portfolio valuation from my accountant updated in February. The number at the bottom was $4.3 million. That was conservative. My accountant tends conservative. I set it on the table. I looked at it for a while. Then I went to bed. I want to explain something because people always ask when they find out. They say, "Why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you just show him who you were?" I started cleaning houses when Daniel was 4 years old. His father had left the year before. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way some men leave, gathering themselves piece by piece over months until one morning they're simply not there. I had a child, a mortgage I couldn't cover alone, and a job at a dental office that paid $11 an hour. I started cleaning houses on weekends, then on evenings. I was good at it because I was thorough, and because I showed up exactly when I said I would, and because I treated people's homes carefully. Word spread. By the time Daniel started kindergarten, I had 14 regular clients and had hired my first assistant. By the time he started middle school, I had a proper cleaning company. 14 employees, commercial contracts with 3 office buildings, residential clients all over Fairfield County. I never told Daniel any of this was unusual. I told him I ran a cleaning business. He knew. He just understood it, I think, the way children understand things that aren't explained to them, as something that was fine for us but not something to bring up. The first property I bought was a duplex in Bridgeport in 2001. 2 units, needed work, priced low because the previous owner had let it go. I fixed the plumbing myself from a library book, repainted both units, replaced the kitchen fixtures. I rented both sides to working families. The rent covered my mortgage and left money over. I used that money to buy a small commercial space in 2004. A dry cleaner had been running out of it for 20 years, and the owner wanted to retire. I bought it, kept the dry cleaner on at reduced rent because he was 68 years old and had nowhere else to go, and eventually transitioned the space when he retired. That's how it went. Slow, careful, nothing dramatic. I was not a real estate genius. I was a woman who showed up, paid attention, and reinvested every dollar I could afford to. Daniel grew up and went to college and found his way into real estate, which still strikes me as something worth sitting with. He built a career advising developers on commercial acquisitions. He never once asked me how I'd been able to pay his tuition without loans, or how I managed the house repairs myself, or why I kept a folder of property deeds in my kitchen drawer. I hadn't hidden it from him. I just hadn't advertised it. I thought, maybe naively, that if I told him before he'd proven what he was, the money would color everything. I wanted to know that he loved me as his mother first, as the woman who packed his lunches and sat with him through chickenpox and drove him to SAT prep at 7 in the morning, not as an asset. After the wedding, I began to understand that he didn't love me as any of those things anymore. I wasn't sure when it had shifted. Maybe it had shifted gradually, like a house settling, small invisible movements that add up to something you can only see from the outside. 3 days after the wedding, my phone rang. Daniel. Mom. He sounded careful. I've been thinking about the envelope. Have you? Celeste looked it up. The building on Clement Street. I waited. She says the assessed value is listed at around $800,000. That's the tax assessment. Market value is closer to 1.2. A pause. He absorbed this. Why didn't you tell me you owned a building downtown? It's one of 16, I said. I've been meaning to have a real conversation about the portfolio for a few years. I thought the wedding might be a good occasion. Another pause. Longer. 16 properties. Yes, Mom. His voice changed. Why are you just telling me this now? I tried to tell you Saturday, I said. Celeste laughed. He didn't have an answer for that. I could hear him breathing, recalibrating. She didn't mean anything by it, he finally said. She called me Barbara. That was a mistake. She's been making that mistake for 3 years, Daniel. I paused. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because I want you to know that the deed I gave you Saturday is still your gift. The property is yours. I'll have my attorney transfer it properly. He was quiet for a moment. That's incredibly generous. It's what I planned, I said. Nothing about that changed. I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap. Out the window, the yard was coming into early spring, the forsythia starting to bloom along the back fence. Daniel had picked those bushes. He was 11, and he'd seen them at a neighbor's house and asked if we could have them, and we'd spent a Saturday afternoon planting them along the fence together, both of us muddy by noon. He remembered that, I was sure of it. He had to. What he might not have understood was that those forsythia bushes were planted with money I'd made from the first rental unit I'd ever owned, that the fence they grew against had been repaired with money from the second, that every inch of the life we'd built together had been constructed from work he'd always considered a little embarrassing. 2 weeks after our phone call, my accountant called me. Her name is Harriet, and she has been managing my books for 11 years. She is methodical and unsentimental, and I trust her completely. Wren, she said, I've been looking at the Clement Street building. You know the tenants' leases are up for renewal in 8 months. I know. She paused. The Whitmore boy reached out to my office. Daniel. I sat up straighter. He wants to discuss acquiring the property. He said he understood it had been gifted to him and wanted to formalize the arrangement, but he also mentioned that his father-in-law might have interest in the broader portfolio. She was careful with her phrasing. He asked about the other 15 addresses. I set down my tea. He told his father-in-law. That would be my interpretation, yes. I took a breath. Harriet, do you remember when I incorporated Ashwood Property Holdings in 2009? Yes. None of those properties are in my name. They're held by the LLC. My name doesn't appear in any public filing. She understood immediately. So when Daniel looked you up, he found the Clement Street building, which is the one property I still hold personally. I had been meaning to transfer it into the LLC for years. I'd never gotten around to it. Yes, she said slowly. So the Whitmores believe they have a partial picture. They believe they have the whole picture. A moment of quiet. What would you like to do? I thought about Celeste on that terrace. The laugh, effortless and dismissive. It's very sweet. I'd like to get a full updated appraisal on all 16 properties, I said, and I'd like to revisit my estate planning documents. Of course. Anything else? Yes. I'd like to reach out to a contact of mine at Fairfield Community Housing. I'd been thinking about the Clement Street building. I want to explore converting it. Converting it to what? Affordable units. The top 2 floors are vacant. There's enough space for 12 apartments if we reconfigure. Harriet was quiet for a moment. That would significantly change the revenue profile. I know. She didn't argue. She never argues. That's why I trust her. I'll set up the meetings, she said. Thank you, Harriet. I hung up and walked to the window. The forsythia was in full bloom now, yellow against the gray April sky. I stood there for a long time thinking about what it meant to build something and what it meant to give it away and what the difference was between those two things. Daniel called 3 times the following week. I answered once on a Wednesday evening when I was making soup and felt steady enough. He said Celeste's father would like to have dinner. He said we'd love to understand the full scope of what you've built. He said family should be on the same page about these things. Family, I said. Of course, he said. We're family. I said. Of course, he said. We're family. I stirred my soup. When's the last time you called me before you needed something? That's not fair. It might not be fair, I said, but it's a question. He was quiet. I said, I'll think about dinner. I'll be in touch. I hung up and turned down the heat under the soup and stood in my kitchen thinking about the 11-year-old boy who had planted forsythia in the mud. I missed him in the specific way you miss people who still exist. It's a different kind of grief. Sharper, somehow. I went to see an attorney the following Monday, not my usual attorney who handles property transactions. A different one. His name is Vincent Aldridge, and a friend of mine had used him for a complex estate matter 2 years ago and recommended him without qualification. I brought a folder. He's the kind of attorney who reads documents before speaking, which I appreciated. We sat across from each other in a quiet office near the courthouse, and he said after reading for 10 minutes, "You have a significant estate." I know. Your current documents leave everything to your son. Yes. I want to change that. He looked at me over his glasses, not with judgment, just taking the measure of the decision. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. I told him about the wedding. I told him about the deed and the laugh and Barbara. I told him about Daniel's call 3 days later and Harriet's call and what it meant that Daniel had told his in-laws about a property he'd held for exactly 72 hours. Aldridge listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you want the outcome to be?" I thought about it honestly. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I've been turning that over for 2 weeks and I'm sure of it. I want accountability. There's a difference." He nodded. "What does accountability look like to you?" "I want the estate structured so that any inheritance Daniel receives is tied to his demonstrated behavior, not to what he says, to what he does over time." I paused. "I also want a significant portion to go to community purposes, specifically affordable housing in Hartford and Bridgeport." He wrote notes. "How much to community purposes?" I looked at the portfolio valuation on the table between us, whatever isn't earned by Daniel through time, through showing up. Aldridge looked at me carefully. "That's a generous definition." "Someone was generous with me once," I said. "A woman named Dolores gave me my first cleaning contract in 1991, a $100 a week job. She paid me on time every week without question for 2 years. She never asked me to justify myself. She just gave me a chance to show what I could do. I want to build something that does that. At scale." He smiled slightly. "Then let's build it correctly." We were in that office for 2.5 hours. I drove home through Bridgeport, past the duplex I bought in 2001, now worth 11 times what I paid for it. The dry cleaner space, now a community office for a legal aid nonprofit that had been there for 7 years. The building on Alderton Avenue with the red awning, which had been a failing laundromat when I bought it, and was now a combination laundromat and child care center run by a woman named June who had 4 employees and a waiting list. I had never told Daniel about June, or about Dolores, or about any of it. Maybe that was my failure too. Daniel called 4 more times before I reached out to him. I waited until I was ready. That took 11 days. I asked him to meet me for lunch. Not at a restaurant he would choose, which would be the kind of place where you couldn't have a real conversation because the ambient noise was calibrated for exactly that purpose. A diner in Bridgeport called Marion's, where I'd been eating on Saturday mornings for 20 years. Vinyl booths, coffee that came in ceramic mugs, a pie case by the register. He came in looking slightly uncomfortable in his good clothes. Looked around the diner the way people look at places that weren't designed to impress them. I ordered the egg salad. He ordered coffee. I said, "I want to tell you something. Not an argument, just information." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Okay, I've been building a real estate portfolio since 2001. It currently consists of 16 properties across 4 counties. The portfolio is held by an LLC called Ashwood Property Holdings. My name doesn't appear in public records. The Clement Street building is the only property in my personal name. I've been meaning to transfer it for years. He absorbed this slowly. How much is the portfolio worth? Current conservative estimate is $4.3 million. Market adjusted, closer to 5.5. He set down his coffee. He stopped. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to know who you were first. The same thing I'd been thinking for 20 years. Finally said plainly, I wanted to know if you called me because you loved me or because I was useful. He flinched. I'm not saying that to wound you, I said. I'm saying it because it's true, and because what happened after the wedding confirmed something I've been afraid of for a while. He was quiet for a long time. The diner moved around us, plates arriving at other tables, someone's child insisting on chocolate milk. When you gave me that deed, he finally said, you weren't just giving me a building. No, you were testing me. I thought about that. More like watching, I said. I already knew what I needed to know. I just wanted to see if I was wrong. He looked at his coffee. What did Celeste's father say to you? When he contacted Harriet? Nothing. He contacted Harriet, not me. He wanted information about assets. He thought he understood the scope of what I had. He only knew about the one building? Yes. Daniel was quiet again. Celeste is going to be. He paused. She's going to take this hard. She can take it however she needs to, I said. That's her business. What's my business is what you decide to do with this information right now? He looked up at me. What are my options? I took a sip of coffee. You can go home and tell your wife and her father that the portfolio was significantly larger than they thought, and watch how that changes the conversation. Or you can decide that you'd like to have a relationship with me that isn't about property values. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, but one of them has to come first. He was silent for a long time, long enough that the waitress came by and refilled my coffee without being asked, and gave us both the look of a woman who understood that something important was happening and had the grace to leave it alone. Mom, he finally said. His voice had changed, not the careful managed tone from the terrace, from our phone calls. Something older, something I recognized from a long time ago. I'm sorry about the wedding. I should have said something when she laughed. I should have corrected her about your name. I know. I got caught up in wanting everything to go smoothly, and I let you pay for it. Yes, I let him sit with it. Not cruelly. But I didn't rescue him from it either. He said, I don't know how to undo that. You don't undo it. You don't undo it. You just don't do it again. He nodded slowly. What are you going to do with the portfolio? I'm restructuring my estate, I said. A portion will come to you conditionally, based on demonstrated relationship over time. The rest will go to community housing initiatives in Hartford and Bridgeport. Community housing. Places where working people can afford to live. The kind of place I needed when you were 4 years old and I was cleaning houses on weekends to keep the lights on. The kind of place most people don't think about until they need one. He was quiet. He was looking at me differently. I don't know what I looked like to him in that moment. Probably not what he'd expected. He said, can I be involved? In the housing initiative. I studied him carefully. The question mattered. Not because I needed his help, but because it meant something about what he was choosing. Come to Bridgeport with me next week, I said. I want you to meet some people. After that, we'll see. He nodded. We stayed at Marian's for another hour. We talked about the duplex in Bridgeport, which he didn't know I owned, and about the legal aid office, and about June and her laundromat and childcare center. I told him about Dolores. He listened in a way he hadn't listened to me in years. Like he was actually trying to understand something rather than manage it. At one point he said, you built all of this while running the cleaning company, raising you and volunteering Tuesday evenings at the elementary school library for 9 years. I said, yes. He shook his head. Not in dismissal, in something closer to astonishment. You were invisible to me, he said quietly. Most working women are, I said. That's the point. We drove separately back to our separate houses. I went home and made tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat on the night of the wedding, looking at the portfolio summary. I pulled out a different document this time. The plans Harriet had connected me with through Fairfield Community Housing for the Clement Street conversion. 12 units, 2 bedrooms each, prioritized for essential workers. Estimated completion 14 months from now. My name wouldn't appear on the building. That was the point. There's a woman I've thought about for many years. Her name is Dolores Ferreira, and she gave me my first real chance when I was 31 years old and desperately needed one. She's gone now, passed about 8 years ago. But I think about what she built without meaning to. The ripple of a single decision. I cleaned floors, I'd told her at our first meeting, a little defensive because I was used to people being dismissive. She'd said, "Everyone's floors need cleaning. Can you start Tuesday?" Just that. No ceremony, no pity, no condescension, just a door opening. I have tried to open doors like that for 20 years, quietly, through the properties I've bought and the tenants I've chosen and the organizations I've supported. June's Child Care Center exists because I held her rent steady for 3 years while she built her business. The legal aid nonprofit exists because I offered them a below-market lease when they had nowhere to go. None of that is in any document Daniel or the Whitmores could find. It's just the shape of what I chose to build. The week after our lunch at Marion's, Daniel came with me to Bridgeport. He met June, who showed him around the child care center with the particular pride of someone who's built something with their hands. He met the director of the legal aid nonprofit, a young man named whose small office was covered in case files, and who talked about the families he served with a focus that reminded me of myself at 30. Daniel was quiet most of the afternoon. On the drive back, he said, "How come you never talked about any of this?" "Because I was doing it, not talking about it," I said. He nodded, looked out the window. "I'd like to help, for real, not because of the estate." "I believe you," I said, "and we'll see. That's enough for now." "We'll see" covers a lot of ground. He smiled at that. A real one. Not the careful smile from the terrace. It's been 4 months since the wedding. Celeste and I are not close. I don't expect we will be. She is who she is, and I am who I am, and those two things don't require each other's approval to be true. Daniel calls more often now. Sometimes for a reason, sometimes not. Last week he called to tell me the forsythia at his new house wasn't blooming, and he couldn't figure out why. We talked for 40 minutes about soil pH and sunlight angles, and I looked up 3 different gardening websites while we were on the phone. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about any of it. It was just 2 people talking about forsythia on a Tuesday night. The Clement Street building conversion broke ground last month. 12 units. Prioritized for nurses, teachers, home health aides, sanitation workers. People whose work is essential and whose names nobody remembers. Daniel attended the groundbreaking. He stood next to me while the project manager walked us through the timeline, and he asked good questions. Practical ones. On the drive home, he said, "You know that woman, Sandra Torres, the one who was first on the wait list? She's been commuting 90 minutes each way because she can't afford to live in the city where she works." "I know," I said. He looked at the road ahead. "That's wrong." "Yes," I said. "That's why we're fixing it." We drove the rest of the way in a comfortable quiet. I don't tell this story because it ended perfectly. It didn't. There are things between Daniel and me that are still healing, slow as forsythia in poor soil. There are things Celeste said and didn't say that I carry with me. There are years I can't give back, years he was learning to see me as something to manage rather than someone to know. But here's what I've decided. At 63 years old, having built something nobody saw and given pieces of it away and started the long, quiet work of being known by my own son, the work was never about being seen. It was about what the work made possible. Every floor I cleaned in 1991, every lease I signed, every repair I figured out from a library book, it was all towards something. Not money. Purpose. My name won't be on the Clement Street building. But 12 families will unlock their front doors for the first time and step into something safe and affordable, and that will be true whether or not anyone knows I built it. That's enough. That has always been enough. If you've stayed with me through all of this, you already understand why. You know what it is to be underestimated. You know what it is to build in silence. And you know that the people who laughed at the gift will someday understand what they were holding. It's not spare time. It's not spare time. It's not spare change. It never was. I've thought a lot about what Celeste actually took from that terrace railing. Nothing. She left the deed sitting there and walked away laughing, and that image has stayed with me longer than I expected it to. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it was so perfectly clear. You spend 30 years building something, and the people who dismiss you most confidently are almost always the ones who've never had to build anything at all. What I've come to understand, and I mean really understand, not just say, is that the way you're treated by people who underestimate you is information. It's not an accident, and it's not random. It's data about who they are and what they value, and if you pay attention to it rather than argue against it, you'll know exactly what you're dealing with. Celeste didn't laugh at a piece of paper. She laughed at a version of me she'd decided was true without ever asking a single question. That's not cruelty exactly. It's a kind of willful blindness that comes from never having needed to look closely at anything. The hard thing, the thing I had to sit with for many nights after the wedding, is that Daniel let it happen. My son, the boy who planted forsythia in the mud on a Saturday afternoon, who used to fall asleep on the couch with his homework still in his hands. He stood on that terrace, and he let her laugh, and he let her walk away, and he followed her. That is the consequence of choices made slowly over years, of small surrenders that accumulate until you don't recognize the person making them. I'm not without blame there either. I kept too much to myself for too long, thinking silence was a kind of protection. What I was actually doing was leaving him without the full picture of who raised him, and that absence shaped things. The truth about cause and effect is that it doesn't care about intentions. You can mean well and still leave gaps that other people fill in badly. I meant for Daniel to know me as his mother first, as a person before an asset. What actually happened is that he didn't know me at all, which left room for other people to define me. That's on me as much as anyone. What's also true is that character announced itself exactly when it needed to. Harriet called because she's thorough and loyal and has been paying attention for 11 years. Daniel came to Bridgeport because, underneath everything, something in him still wanted to understand. June showed a stranger around her childcare center with the pride of someone who built it themselves, because that's who June is. People show you who they are when the circumstances are right, and I've learned to trust that more than words. The 3 things that actually got me to where I am at 63 are not complicated, though they weren't easy. I showed up when it was inconvenient. I kept my word to myself even when no one else was watching. And I reinvested every gain, not just money, trust, time, knowledge, back into something that would outlast me. That's not a formula. It's just what happens when you decide that the work matters more than the recognition. Dolores gave me a Tuesday. I built 16 properties from it. Someday 12 families will unlock doors because of a deed a young woman laughed at and left on a railing. She still doesn't know what she was holding.